You think you make your own decisions. You think when you say yes, it's because you chose to. When you trust someone, it's because they earned it. When you walk away from a conversation feeling good about a person, it's because they're genuinely good. Here's what the research actually shows. Most of the time, you didn't choose. You were steered, quietly, precisely, by psychological mechanisms so embedded in human wiring that even knowing about them barely makes you immune. I mean that literally. These aren't theories. They're documented, replicated, clinically verified techniques used by salespeople, negotiators, politicians, narcissists, and the person sitting across from you at dinner, often without even knowing they're doing it. This video covers the 3 dark psychology tricks that almost nobody warns you about, not because they're rare, but because they're invisible. Stay until the end, because I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like when all 3 of these get used on the same person in the same relationship, and how long it can take before they even notice. Trick number 1. They touch you first, and your brain surrenders. This one is going to make you rethink every interaction you've had this week. I mean that. In one of the most replicated experiments in social psychology, researchers asked strangers on the street to fill out a survey. When the request was made without any physical contact, compliance was modest. Most people declined. But when the researcher gently touched the participant on the elbow for just 1 second before asking, agreement rates soared. 1 second, 1 elbow. The words were identical. The outcome was completely different. Here's what's happening in your brain. Touch activates something ancient, something that evolved long before language, when physical closeness meant safety, belonging, cooperation. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between a genuine touch from a trusted friend and a calculated touch from a stranger trying to influence you. It just feels the same. Waiters who briefly touch a customer's shoulder receive significantly larger tips. Teachers who pat a student on the back are rated as warmer and more competent. Salespeople who touch your arm while showing you a product make you feel more positively about what you're seeing, without you ever realizing why. And it goes darker than that. A hand on your back can steer you through a doorway without resistance. A fleeting tap on your arm can frame a request as friendly rather than intrusive. It blurs the line between your choice and their influence, and leaves you with the impression that you freely agreed when your body had already made the decision. The sign to watch for: someone who initiates physical contact right before making a request. Ask yourself honestly, would you have said yes if they hadn't touched you first? Because the first to touch doesn't just get your attention, they often get your compliance. Trick number 2. They start with the impossible. So you say yes to the reasonable. This one sounds obvious. And I was like, okay, I know this one. But I didn't. Not really. Here's what it actually looks like in practice. A psychology experiment in the 1970s asked strangers to volunteer 2 full years of their lives mentoring troubled youth. Nearly everyone refused. Then came the second request. Could they at least spend a couple of hours chaperoning kids to the zoo? Agreement rates jumped dramatically. This is called the door-in-the-face technique, and it works because of one deeply wired psychological principle: contrast. When the impossible comes first, the reasonable looks like relief. Car dealers show you the fully loaded luxury model before presenting the modest sedan. Charities ask for large donations before suggesting a smaller recurring gift. Your boss assigns you an enormous project, then immediately asks for something smaller. You agree to the smaller thing with a gratitude you wouldn't have felt otherwise. Even children deploy this instinctively. They ask for dessert before dinner so that settling for one cookie feels like a compromise they won. And the dark version, the version nobody tells you about, is this. It's not just about requests, it's about reality. When someone exposes you to an extreme version of anything, extreme anger, extreme demands, extreme behavior, your baseline shifts. What once seemed unreasonable starts to feel normal by comparison. Abusive relationships use this constantly. Escalating behavior doesn't feel like escalation. It feels like the new standard, because the contrast has already done its work. The sign to watch for: whenever a request feels surprisingly reasonable, ask what came before it, because the first ask wasn't the real ask. It was the setup. Trick number 3. They say nothing, and you tell them everything. This is the one I told you to stay for. And it might be the most unsettling thing in this video. I really do mean that. Most people think influence requires words, the right argument, the right question, the right pressure. But here's what the best negotiators, therapists, interrogators, and manipulators all know. Silence is the most powerful move in any conversation. When a pause stretches longer than feels comfortable, most people experience something close to panic. The silence feels wrong, unresolved, and the urge to restore balance is almost irresistible. So they talk. They fill the void with whatever comes next, and what comes next is usually the truth, unfiltered, unedited, unintended. Negotiators use this constantly. After making a proposal, they go quiet. The silence grows heavy, and the other side, desperate to ease the tension, concedes more than they needed to. Salespeople do the same. A customer hesitates, the seller says nothing, and the silence itself pushes the buyer toward a decision. But the version that doesn't get talked about enough is this one. The person who does this to you in a personal conversation. They ask you something, and then they wait, not with impatience, with calm, with what feels like patience and genuine interest, and you, trying to fill that space, trying to feel less exposed, trying to seem like you have nothing to hide, start talking. And then keep talking. And before you realize what's happened, you've shared things you had no plan to share. That's the trick. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like being listened to. It feels like someone actually cares. Because the most powerful manipulators don't pressure you. They give you space and let the space do the work. The sign to watch for: someone who asks and then waits, with perfect patience, with no follow-up questions, who gives you just enough silence that you feel compelled to fill it. Ask yourself, are you talking because you want to, or because the quiet felt unbearable? What it looks like when all three happen at once. Here's a pattern therapists see over and over in relationships that took months, sometimes years, to unravel. It starts small. Someone new comes into your life. They're warm, attentive, physically affectionate early on. A hand on your shoulder, a touch on the arm during a laugh, nothing alarming. It feels like chemistry. It feels natural. Weeks in, they mention something bigger than you expected. Maybe moving in together after a month. Maybe an intense declaration of commitment far earlier than feels normal. You hesitate. Then they scale it back. Just spending more weekends together, just texting more often. Compared to what they first proposed, that feels easy, reasonable. You say yes without really deciding to. And through all of it, there are these moments of silence. They ask you something personal, about your past, your fears, your family. And then they just wait, patient, present. And you find yourself explaining things you've never told anyone. It feels like intimacy. It feels like being truly seen. 3 tricks, 1 relationship. And by the time any tension shows up, the person is already deeply invested, already sharing things they can't take back, already operating on a baseline that shifted so gradually they never noticed the shift. This is not a description of an obvious villain. It's a description of how ordinary influence compounds. One small mechanism stacked on another, each one invisible on its own. That's why awareness has to come before the fact, not after. Because from the inside, it never looks like manipulation while it's happening. It only looks like that in hindsight. And by then, the story has already been written. 3 tricks. Touch that bypasses your consent. Contrast that reshapes your decisions. Silence that extracts your truth. None of them feel like manipulation when they're happening. That's what makes them so effective. And here's the uncomfortable part. You've used all three of these, probably without knowing. Because they're not evil, they're human, baked into how we operate, how we influence, how we connect. The difference between using them and being used by them is one thing: awareness. And now you have it.